Greetings and welcome to episode 3 of this special 6-part mini-series of Clock Tower. In part 1 we covered an overview of the series, mapping out the series timeline and inconsistent naming by region, whilst in part 2 we took a look at the first entry on the list. If you missed either, I recommend going back and watching these first. Don't worry, I'll be here waiting for you. So, here we're making the first jump into 3D in the Clock Tower series. In Japan, the game was marketed as Clock Tower 2, a sequel to the first Famicom game, although in the UK and the US this was the first game in the series to be released, so simply carried the title Clock Tower. Following on from the events of the first Clock Tower game, Jennifer has been adopted by Helen Maxwell, an assistant professor of criminal psychology in Oslo, Norway. It's now 1 year since the events of the first game and a series of murders is shocking the country. Helen is relying on Jennifer's past experience with the Scissorman to unlock any clues as to how to stop the killer. It's a great setup to the sequel, and I'm pleased that Jennifer is a returning character in the series. The game takes a drastic shift from 2D into a 3D world, although the main mechanics have remained the same. Jennifer must interact to collect items, speak with people around her, and foil the Scissorman should he appear. Early on in the game, the action is set around simply getting out of the police headquarters alive. You'll be exploring new areas and picking up useful items to aid your escape. A common criticism of the game is the pace compared with the first entry in the series. I'd have to agree to some extent. You will be playing a good 30 minutes before anything exciting happens. The build-up is slow and far more narrative driven than the first Fear, but the wait is worth it. There's some excellent set pieces here, and you'll never quite know when the Scissorman will appear, so there's some great tension that's built up for the player to experience. There's some obvious horror cliches thrown in for good measure, but overall the game seems to have a gruesome charm of its own.
Hello, police department.
There's been a murder. Come, quickly, please.
Please relax, ma'am. Did you see the murderer?
He's the one with the giant scissors. Scissorman. You've heard of him, haven't you?
If this is a prank phone call...
Wait!
The point-and-click nature of the game is quite unusual for a PS1 title, and takes some getting used to at first. In my opinion, it does help build the tension though, as you feel you're steering your character with pre-planned intent. Once the Scissorman arrives, the game is genuinely tense. Where will he be? Where will I hide? The core feel of the first game is retained here. The overall aesthetic of the game will be quite divisive for some. The first Fear was undoubtedly very well illustrated, and the cinematic nature a real draw for some horror fans. This 3D reimagining of the game has several challenges. As a reasonably early 3D game, the models are noticeably jaggy with a modest polygon count. This extends to the environments. At times the rooms seem very much more like a stage, like you're in a theatre, rather than a real world environment. This was at least partially due to the constraints of the PS1 technology. Most will agree though that the hardware restrictions of the PS1 inadvertently gave this Clock Tower entry a personality of its own. Scissorman himself has had a major rehaul in appearance. Previously we had seen him as a creepy deformed young boy. Just 1 year later he seems much larger and lunging in his movements. In terms of gameplay, Clock Tower has a lot to offer. It's really great to see that 3 elements in particular have been retained: a story-driven narrative, a multi-branching storyline, and also a genuine attempt to create intense scenarios for the player. Clock Tower also gets something else very right that I feel other games in the series are missing, and that something is continuity. Having established in the first Fear the background story, this 3D outing of Clock Tower builds upon the source material. In this example, our decision whether to track down a person ourselves or let someone else do the legwork enables a split in the storytelling. We now get to see the Scissorman storyline from a different perspective. Up until now, it's really only been Scissorman chasing the young girls. This scene here though not only establishes a sense of horror, but also starts to solidify the idea that Scissorman is more of a supernatural character, being able to take several gunshots at short range.
What's wrong, Victor? Be quiet. It's okay, boy. What's the matter? Don't make such a racket.
Having established that Scissorman really can't be fought off, the context of running and hiding is given a little more meaning. You'll need to hide too, as Scissorman will relentlessly track you down and kill you again and again. In some ways, the failure to survive can be a little frustrating. On the other hand though, there's always entertainment value in the death scenes. Personally, this was the first Clock Tower game that I played, so the graphics, models and pacing are no issue. I can see why the transition may be a little bit more drastic though from those that played the 2D version first. When looking at whether this sequel is a good game though, it comes down to the gameplay and the scares. This version of Clock Tower certainly builds on the formula of the first, and I'm inclined to say that the atmosphere, although not as isolated as the Barrows Mansion, does provide enough of an open world feel to feel stalked in. When it comes to collecting, here's what to look out for. This is the UK PAL edition of the game featuring the gruesome image of the Scissorman. The game's CD and inserts are rather standard. The manual does a really good job of explaining everything from the controls, panic mode, to the character descriptions. All in all, this is a very nice item to collect. I believe that the US edition is very similar, with only very small text and logo changes on the box to reflect the NTSC region and the US laws. When it comes to the Japanese release, however, expect a departure from the UK and US artwork. The main game is dark and atmospheric. My preference is for the Japanese cover, it just seems to reflect the tone of the game a little more accurately. Inside you get the registration card and CD. Note the reference to the second on the CD. The manual contains much of the same content as the English version, although obviously in Japanese kanji. Overall, the Japanese release feels a more solid collectible than the UK or US packaging. For the completionists, you will also need to look out for a limited production run demo of Clock Tower 2. This was a not for sale item and was used for promotion for the upcoming game. The biggest difference you'll notice is the game title. Although it is Clock Tower 2, the game clearly carries the title The Door of Fear. This was to be the game's name before it was dropped in favour of just the numeric sequel title. At the time, this would have made a lot more sense for international sales, as Human Entertainment could have released the first Fear and The Door of Fear as internationally consistent titles. The first Fear and The Door of Fear would also have lined up their cover imagery. In the limited edition demo, the CD artwork is lacking in imagery in favour of text only. For a full complement, look for the spine card. This is perhaps one of the harder items to find if you're a collector, and they are easily lost. The idea of the spine card is that its larger size would allow collectors to transfer the game into a standard PS1 case. The demo comes with what I'd describe as a promotional manual. It is essentially a marketing foldout to get you up and running. There's also an advert for Twilight Syndrome, a game I may cover at a later date. As a collector, I did find the Door of Fear demo worth collecting. There are minor changes from the final release, but it's the scarce nature of the demo that most collectors will find appealing. For many collectors, it's the thrill of the hunt that keeps us going. So, is Clock Tower, Clock Tower 2, Clock Tower Door of Fear worth collecting? Here's where things get tricky. Here in the UK, PAL editions now regularly sell in excess of £100 on auction sites. That's around $160 at today's exchange rate. A US NTSC edition will set you back around $80. Although these prices are high, there's good news if you are collecting the Japanese releases. Clock Tower 2 will cost you around £5, that's under $10. The Door of Fear demo can be bought for around £15, that's anywhere up to about $25. Particularly in the UK, collecting prices of this game have spiralled ever upwards. I paid just £30 for mine. Since then, prices have increased by around £10 every year. The trend seems set to continue, at least here in the UK. At some point though, the price will obviously hit a cap. It's quite literally the price we pay for being an island nation of gamers. So, is Clock Tower worth it? I'd have to give this game a thumbs up. If I'm brutally honest, I do prefer the first Fear, but the Door of Fear isn't a game that you should pass up. It's slow moving and a bit clunky, but for Halloween weekend it's a sure thing. There's a blend of jump scares and tension, making it an overall enjoyable experience. And if I've learnt anything by this experience, it's that it can be very tricky to defend yourself with an umbrella. What came next in the series I don't think anyone expected. Stick with us in episode 4 as we leave Norway and travel to the ever darker territory of Japan, with the black sheep of the series, Clock Tower Ghost Head, also known as Clock Tower 2 in the US.